Welcome to week 4 of English 320 American Literature after 1865. This week we move into early modernism, roughly 1900 to 1925, and focus on fragmentation and experiment as writers respond to a rapidly changing world. As you read, watch for how modernist texts break with older straightforward storytelling. You'll see shifts in structure, voice, and time, along with sharper imagery and moments that feel incomplete on purpose. That broken feeling is often the point. Let's go. This graphic illustrates how early modernism often centers on a specific problem. People feel stuck inside themselves and they feel disconnected from others. Pause here and take a screenshot for your notes. This week, we will work with two scholarly readings. One helps us think about Sherwood Anderson's Mother and how questions of genre shape what the story can reveal about a character's interior world. The other focuses on Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock and the modern individual, especially the way hesitation, self consciousness, and social anxiety appear through the poet's form. By the end of this week, you should be able to make a clear claim about how experimentation creates new ways to show consciousness, and you should be ready to support that claim with specific textual details and a few key ideas from the articles. This graphic illustrates our comparison between Sherwood Anderson and T.S. Eliot and how each writer shows an unspoken inner life through form. Notice the split background. On one side, you have a quieter, small town space. On the other, you have the modern city. That contrast matters because both settings create pressure just in different ways. Anderson often shows how a tight community and limited roles can trap a person. Eliot shows how the modern world can overwhelm the self with self doubt, performance, and social anxiety. Move through the texts, keep one question in mind. What is the character trying to say or become? And what stops it from being spoken or acted on? Track moments of hesitation, silence, repetition, and fragmented thought. These formal choices are not decoration, they are how the text represents consciousness. As the 20th century begins, older certainties start to break down. People are living through rapid industrial growth, urban expansion, new technologies, and shifting social expectations. Writers start asking a new question. If the world feels fragmented, pressured, and unstable, what kind of literary form can honestly represent inner life? Look at the image on the left. The silhouette holds both a rural road and a modern skyline. That is the transition we are tracing from small town structures to the modern city and its anonymity. Anderson and Eliot give two different answers to the same challenge. Anderson shows a repressed life shaped by a narrow social world. Eliot shows a mind overloaded by modern life, where thought loops, hesitation, and self consciousness replace decisive action. As you read, keep focusing on form. What does each writer do on the page to make you feel fragmentation, constraint, or disconnection? Now we meet the two figures who anchor this unit's idea of paralysis, one shaped by the limits of a small town, and the other shaped by the pressures of the modern city. Elizabeth Willard represents the quiet tragedy of a life narrowed by circumstance. She is seen by others as drab and insignificant, but internally she carries desire, regret, and a sense of wasted possibility. Her conflict is not simply personal weakness. It is the way her past, her social position, and her community's expectations restrict what she can become. One important detail is how her hope for escape and self expression gets redirected onto her son, George, as if his future is her last available outlet. J. Alfred Prufrock represents a different version of paralysis. He has education and mobility, but he is trapped inside relentless self consciousness. He overthinks, rehearses, doubts, and delays. His conflict is driven by fear of judgment, anxiety about aging and appearance, and a deep sense that authentic connection is out of reach. As you read, track what is restricting each character. For Elizabeth, look for external limits that shape her inner life. For Prufrock, look for internal habits of thought that become their own kind of prison. Modernism is not only a shift in themes, it is a shift in form. Writers begin experimenting with structure because they believe older forms cannot fully represent the modern mind. Sherwood Anderson's innovation is what critics call the epic sketch. Instead of building a long traditional novel arc, he compresses the narrative into a concentrated portrait that still feels wide in time and space. The idea is to combine broad scope with close psychological detail, so a short form can still carry the weight of a life. As you read, watch how quickly the story moves across years or major emotional turns, and then notice how sharply it pauses on revealing moments that expose inner conflict. T.S. Eliot's innovation is fragmentation. The poem's form mirrors anxiety and mental dislocation. Eliot breaks from smooth romantic lyric patterns by using free verse, irregular rhyme, and sudden shifts in voice and scene. One key tool here is the objective correlative, using external images and objects to carry emotional meaning when the speaker cannot state that meaning directly. Pay attention to how the structure itself feels unsettled and ask what that instability suggests about Prufrock's inner life. The main takeaway is that both authors invent forms that function like psychology. Instead of simply describing consciousness, they build it into the way the text moves, pauses, breaks, and connects. Both texts use place as a psychological trap. The setting is not background, it becomes a visible symbol of what the character wants and what the character cannot reach. For Elizabeth Willard, the view of Winesburg's main street serves as a daily reminder of a larger life that feels just out of reach. She is physically inside, looking out, and that separation matters. The street represents movement, possibility, and belonging, while her position at the window highlights confinement and disappointment. In Mother, notice how often her desires are expressed indirectly through what she watches, imagines, and cannot do. For Prufrock, the yellow fog is not just weather, it functions as an objective correlative for his mental state. A soft, creeping atmosphere that mirrors hesitation, anxiety, and paralysis. The cat like movement makes that anxiety feel both familiar and inescapable, as if it has settled into the space around him. As you move through the poem, track how the fog changes the tone, motion's momentum, and reinforces the sense that choice is not always postponed. A helpful question to keep in mind is this: in each text, what does the environment quietly persuade the character to accept, and what does it quietly prevent the character from becoming? Both works show desire as something real but difficult to speak directly. Instead of open confession, the characters redirect longing into safer forms. For Elizabeth Willard, desire gets translated into a kind of projected prayer. She is locked into a small life, and that frustration does not disappear. It shifts into a desperate hope that her son can do what she could not, speak what she could not, and move beyond the limits that trapped her. Pay attention to how her feelings come out through pleading, ritual like language, and the intensity of what she asks for George, because it reveals what she needed for herself. For Prufrock, Desire is framed as a love song that never becomes an actual declaration. The title is ironic because the poem is full of preparation, self monitoring, and imagined consequences, but it never arrives at the moment of asking. His desire is trapped behind an overwhelming question, and the fear of judgment turns emotion into delay. As you read, notice how often he substitutes imagining for acting, and how the poem treats hesitation as a form of self protection that also becomes a prison. A useful way to read both texts is to ask, what is the character trying to say? What stops them from saying it plainly? And what form does the desire take instead? Both Anderson and Eliot build their characters around a split between what other people see and what the character actually lives internally. In Winesburg, Elizabeth Willard's public identity is shaped by the town's gaze. She appears quiet, sick, and insignificant, and even becomes a convenient target for blame in her household. But privately, she is not empty at all. She carries intense emotion, buried anger, and a history of love and disappointment that still has force. The tigress image matters because it signals that the private self is fierce and protective, even if it has been contained and misread. In Prufrock, the public self is something he manufactures on purpose. He treats social life like a performance that requires strategy, timing, and the right expression. The famous line about preparing a face captures that constant self editing. Privately, though, his inner world is crowded with doubt and anxiety, and desire becomes something he thinks around rather than speaks. The more carefully he constructs his outward mask, the more trapped he becomes inside the private turmoil it is meant to hide. As you read both texts, track the cost of this split. Ask who benefits from the public mask, who is harmed by it, and what the private self reveals that the social world refuses to recognize. Both characters feel time as pressure, but they experience it in different directions. Elizabeth Willard is pulled backwards by history. Her life is shaped by inherited patterns of anger, punishment, and emotional damage, and even her choices are filtered through what has already happened to her and around her. When she looks ahead, the future does not belong to her. The only future that feels possible is a borrowed one, invested in her son as an escape she cannot claim for herself. Prufrock is trapped in a loop between regret and anticipation. He carries the weight of missed opportunities and unresolved worries, and he keeps replaying what he should have done differently. At the same time, the future terrifies him because it contains judgment and rejection. That fear becomes an excuse to delay, and the promise that there will be time turns into a habit of postponement. The result is a life spent preparing to live instead of actually living. As you read, watch how each text turns time into confinement. Notice what the past controls, what the future threatens, and how that pressure limits what the character can say, do, or imagine. Anderson uses empathy to show how a small, ordinary moment can suddenly reveal something painful and true. A tired baker and a hungry cat sounds trivial, but that routine struggle becomes a mirror for Elizabeth's life. In that instant, she recognizes her own exhaustion, confinement, and unmet need, and the emotion finally breaks through. Eliot relies on the objective correlative to do something similar, but through objects and scenes rather than a sudden realization. Rather than telling us what Prufrock feels, the poem gives us images that carry the feeling for him. When the evening is compared to a patient etherized on a table, the world itself starts to look numb, passive, and exposed, which matches Prufrock's inner state without naming it directly. Keep an eye on what each technique accomplishes. Epiphany makes meaning arrive all at once through a moment of recognition. Objective correlative makes meaning accumulate through the external world, so the emotion is felt through atmosphere comparison and detail. Anderson and Eliot are describing the same modern condition, even though the settings and genres look completely different. Both texts circle around paralysis, that feeling that you cannot move forward even when you know what you want. Elizabeth is trapped largely by external forces, a confined life, a failed marriage, and a past she cannot rewrite. Prufrock is trapped largely by internal forces, self-consciousness, fear of judgment, and the fear of what the future might expose. In both cases, the pressure is real, but the person cannot translate desire into action. Both characters also live with unspoken desire. What matters is not only what they say, but what they cannot say. Pay attention to that gap between inner life and outward performance, because that gap is where modernism does much of its work. Finally, notice why form matters here. Anderson compresses and intensifies psychological experience, and Eliot fractures voice and structure to match a fractured mind. The point is that new realities required new techniques, and the experimentation is part of the meaning, not decoration. As we conclude, what I want you to take away is that Anderson and Eliot helped create a new literary language for the 20th century, a way to write the self when the self feels divided, anxious, and unsure. Their work does not romanticize the modern experience. It looks straight at alienation, social pressure, fear of failure, and the quiet paralysis that keeps people from living the lives they imagine. This is why form matters so much. The compressed epic sketch and the fragmented modernist voice are not just styles, they are tools built for representing interlife more honestly. And the final point is simple. Some of the deepest conflicts in literature are the ones that never get spoken out loud. Pay attention to what stays unsaid, because that silence is often where the meaning lives. This concludes our lecture. Thanks for your participation. As always, if you have questions, you can reach out to me via email or office hours, or discuss it in the discussion boards. I'm always happy to hear from you and your feedback. Have a good one. Bye-bye.